Hello, I'm Maurice Powell. Welcome to A Little Light Music, Manx Radio's regular Thursday evening classical music hour. Spring has sprung, at least it feels like it. And so I hope you're enjoying the much warmer weather. Chilly mornings, but warmer weather during the day. This is beginning to sound like a weather report, isn't it? So I think I'll just pass on. But what we do need is something cheerful to start the programme. A little bit of Mozart. Something I don't think I've played before, well, I'm fairly certain. It's one of his church sonatas. Now then, Mozart wrote, I think, 17 of these, give or take, and they were really short instrumental pieces, usually written for just a couple of violins and a bass with organ accompaniment, and they were interpolated into the sung mass that they used to do at Salzburg Cathedral, normally in between the Gloria and the Credo. And they're still sometimes played today. If you go to Vienna and go to one of the big churches on a Sunday morning, they very often will perform a Mozart Mass as part of the service. And they usually use these little church sonatas, if not by Mozart, by somebody else, to make the sort of the collection, passing the plate down the lines. And, well, they usually do very, very well in Vienna, as you might imagine. These church sonatas are very brief. Some of them last less than 4 minutes. 3 minutes, 4 minutes is about average. They're very lightly scored. One or two from the late 1780s are rather larger in scale and have real sort of organ solo parts, a little bit like organ concertos. Some of them even have a bigger orchestra with oboes and trumpets and drums and things. This is one from the mid-1770s. I don't know which particular Mozart Mass this church sonata was attached to. In fact, it's one of those things scholars have been busying themselves with, trying to match up a particular church sonata with a particular Mass, and they've had some success. It doesn't really matter. Anyway, here is a Mozart church sonata in A major. So, something bright and tuneful to start this evening's programme, one of Mozart's church sonatas. Now to the music of Leroy Anderson. Now, Leroy Anderson was not a British light music composer, but many people think that he was, because so many of his pieces were heard countless times. I'm thinking of the famous Sleigh Ride, the Christmas one, the Waltzing Cat, the Syncopated Typewriter, or whatever it was called. I can't remember. There's so many popular ones. He was in fact American. And one of his loveliest pieces, which we have played with the orchestra some years ago at a light music concert, one that I like particularly is Forgotten Dreams, the music of Leroy Anderson. A very attractive little piece there, very simple, but quite lushly scored. Lovely writing for strings, little touches of wind, and bits of percussion as well, tuned percussion, little xylophone or something in the background. Easily to dismiss these pieces. I don't know how long that lasted, less than 3 minutes. A perfect little gem in many ways. Now, carrying on, here's a real British light music composer, Jack Strachey. Many people remember his very popular tune In Party Mood, because it was really used for the BBC light programme's Housewife's Choice. It was that introductory theme for many years. He also wrote the song These Foolish Things. But we're going to hear a piece called Ascot Parade, which again you might very well remember. Particularly if your memory goes back to the 50s, 60s. It was used as the background for many newsreels. So, Jack Strachey, Ascot Parade. Jack Strakey, Ascot Parade. Now, I confess I have a weakness for this kind of British light music piece. Jolly, perky, tuneful, short. There's always something to sort of perk the ears up. That's if ears can be perked up. I'm not absolutely certain. I'll check on that. There's always something going on in the orchestra. They're beautifully orchestrated, very whimsical. In that particular one, I love the use of woodwind instruments coming in there along with the strings. Quite delightful. We don't really hear any of these little pieces now in concerts, although of course the whole field of British light music has been rediscovered, particularly since the music was rescued from oblivion, in some cases simply being thrown away. But now there are lots of light orchestras all over, not here on the Isle of Man, sadly, although the Symphony Orchestra does do the occasional light music programme, and very enjoyable they are too. But across, there are dozens of light orchestras who specialise in this kind of music. I suppose our nearest one is at Morecambe, the famous Platform Orchestra. And they do a series of concerts every year, and they're really good. They draw a huge crowd. They're very enjoyable, and everybody goes away with a smile on their face. Well, that's what concerts are all about, surely. However, let's not get into too much philosophy. Now, as you know, I like to introduce composers occasionally that have been well and truly forgotten, and I'm going to throw a curveball this evening. The composer I have in mind is Carl Czerny. Now, if you're a pianist, perhaps a pianist of mature years, you might very well remember churning through lots of Czerny exercises. He was a fabulous pianist, a contemporary of Beethoven, and he wrote dozens, hundreds probably, of piano exercises, which were the staple of teaching material for decades. So you may very well have come across Czerny, and you probably hate him for that very reason. But apart from that, it was a very interesting composer. In fact, one of the more interesting of Beethoven's contemporaries. He wrote symphonies and a good deal of chamber music. I've heard a number of his string quartets. I have recordings of some of his symphonies, piano concertos, of course, including at least one concerto for piano four hands. In other words, two people playing one piano. Very interesting piece it is too. However, it's the chamber music that comes as a bit of a surprise. I'm going to play the Andante, the slow movement, from his Nonette, composed in 1850. It's for piano, clarinet, cor anglais, that's that rather deeper sounding oboe, bassoon, two violins, viola, cello and bass. A slightly unusual combination. Most large-scale works of this sort have at least a horn in, but he uses the cor anglais instead, which gives an interesting edge to the tonal palette, if I can put it that way. Anyway, see what you think. I think this is a very attractive piece. It's not just showy rubbish, as a lot of piano pieces are in the first part of the 19th century. This is a very serious piece of chamber music. I hope you enjoy it. The music of Carl Czerny. The music of Carl Czerny, Beethoven's very interesting contemporary, that was a slow movement from his Nonette, composed in 1850 for piano, clarinet, cor anglais, bassoon, two violins, viola, cello and bass, and I think it's a very fine piece. If I'd have announced this at the beginning and said it was a very little known composition by Beethoven, perhaps from his Bonn years before he became very famous, probably very few people will have disagreed. It is, as I say, a very fine piece, very well written. The piano part is interesting, but it's not too virtuosic. It doesn't dominate everything. And the writing for the wind instruments is lovely. What's not to like? Well, Carl Czerny, that's C-Z-E-R-N-Y, is a composer well worth investigating, and fortunately there's plenty available on compact disc. We need something silly now, but before I do that, an announcement, something for the diary, a concert which is coming up in quite soon now. This is the annual concert of the Isle of Man Choral Society, together with the Isle of Man Symphony Orchestra, under their conductor Mandy Griffin. The concert takes place on Sunday, the 6th of April, in the Royal Hall at the Villa Marina, where else, at 3 p.m. It's a great programme of French music, both sacred and not profane, but sacred and secular. Fauré Requiem, of course, takes pride of place, a wonderful piece, which I never tire of hearing. Poulenc's Gloria, written in the 1960s, I think, a very interesting, colourful, thoroughly entertaining piece of sacred music. And there will also be extracts from Bizet's Carmen, the prelude, the famous habanera, two or three other arias, a Toreador's song, an entr'acte or two. Very, very interesting programme. Tickets are available, of course, usual places at the Villa Marina, box office, and so on and so forth. So, Isle of Man Choral Society with the Isle of Man Symphony Orchestra, with their conductor Mandy Griffin, Sunday the 6th of April, 3 o'clock, Villa Marina, a wonderful programme of French music. So, something silly I said, something just to sort of take the edge off the Czerny. This is The Dance of the Little Pink Pony by Bernie Wayne. The music of Bernie Wayne, Dance of the Little Pink Horse. I think I said pony at the beginning, but it's definitely Dance of the Little Pink Horse. Again, an attractive, catchy, jolly little piece. What's not to like about it? Now to the music of Percy Grainger, a composer who does appear in this programme reasonably frequently, on the strength of a large number of pieces which you would broadly describe as light music. Percy Grainger was not British, of course, he was Australian. He did spend about 20 years in the UK, sort of just around the 1900s up to about the First World War, just after, and then lived most of his life in America. But we tend to think of him as an English composer. Very strange. However, this is a piece really for the choristers amongst you. Now, I've spoken to many choral singers over the years, and I get the impression that particularly here on the Isle of Man, one thing they do not like is to sing in a foreign language, which is why we hear so many Messiahs, creations, Elijahs and so forth. They will occasionally make an exception for Latin, particularly with something like the Fauré Requiem, which we're going to hear in a couple of weeks, because it's fairly slow moving. But fast-moving music in a foreign language is a problem for choirs. They don't really like it, which is a pity because we do miss quite a lot of repertoire, exciting repertoire, that we might otherwise hear. Nevertheless, this piece I'm going to play now is perfect for you all because it has a wordless chorus. Excellent, isn't it? Not only do you not have to learn any words, but it saves acres of print in the programme as well. It's wordless. What else can I say? This is Percy Grainger's Marching Song of Democracy. Now, he was inspired to write this piece in 1900 when he was visiting Paris for the exhibition that year. And when he was wandering around the city, he came across a statue of George Washington and was inspired to compose this optimistic vocal march. Very interesting indeed. He tinkered with this piece, as he did with many of his pieces, over some time. He originally wanted it scored for male voices, children's voices, and to include a wordless chorus, whistling and stamping. But anyway, 1901, 1908 it was revised, and the version we're going to hear now is the latest version that I know of from 1915. Very interesting piece. Percy Grainger, March Song of Democracy. Well, Percy Grainger, Marching Song of Democracy, a wordless vocal march, really. What do we think? Very difficult to sing. All right, you get away with not having to learn words, but my goodness me. It reminds me of Delius in a way. Delius at his most sort of ecstatic. Very strange piece. Grainger was in many ways a very strange composer. But I quite like it. It's very unusual. It requires a huge orchestra. And as I say, it sounds to me very difficult to sing indeed. I don't think it'll be programmed here anytime soon. But there are lots of other things by Percy Grainger, and they're all in English, that would appeal, I think, to our choral societies. If anybody's interested, I just about have the complete works of Percy Grainger on compact disc, and I could easily find 2 or 3 lovely choral pieces, vocal pieces that choirs might consider. Just give me a call sometime and I'll make a few suggestions. Anyway, in the meantime, Marching Song of Democracy. Well, what do we need now? Something to bring us back down to earth. Let's go back to Leroy Anderson, the composer we heard near the beginning of the programme. This is The Phantom Regiment. The Phantom Regiment there by Leroy Anderson, very attractive muted trumpet fanfares and a nice sort of march-like tread all the way through. An attractive piece. Now here's another attractive piece. This is by Hayden Wood, our adopted national composer. This is An Evening Song, written in 1923, a very gentle piece, a little bit of an impassioned central section, but it returns to the peace and calm at the end. Hayden Wood, An Evening Song. What an attractive piece. Hayden Wood, An Evening Song, composed in 1923. Let's stick with Hayden Wood for our play out this evening. We've come to the end of the programme, as these hours seem to go very quickly indeed. I hope you've enjoyed my selection. Been an odd one, really. We've had some light music, of course, but we've also had an interesting piece by Czerny, Beethoven's contemporary, bit of Mozart, a very strange piece by Percy Grainger, but then they're all strange, aren't they, really? So let's see what we have now. Let's stick with Hayden Wood, since we've got the CD running. This is from a suite, Snapshots of London. So to play us out, it's Queen Mary's Garden, Regent's Park. Please join me again next week at 9. Goodbye.